What up, Cucks? I really enjoyed the first video that I made as part of this new budding series of WWE and AEW both suck, right? So we have part two coming at you, cuckolds. Now, another thing that WWE and AEW are both failing miserably at is providing moments. Now, I want everyone to remove their recency bias because we're right around the corner from WrestleMania season. So yes, even though I think it's horseshit, I'm not stupid. I recognize that a lot of people believe that Cody Rhodes winning the title was a moment, right? Notice that nobody really said it was a WrestleMania moment, but I digress, right? Beyond that, wrestling is no longer about moments. In my WrestleMania 15 review, I explained in so many words why the card was chock full of moments. Moments are what drive wrestling. Moments are what separate wrestling from other sports, right? Or I should say, rather, that the ability to fabricate and create contrived moments in wrestling are what should separate wrestling from other sports. Now, let me explain something to you. First, I don't know if anybody watched UFC 300. The only thing of note, it was a bunch of jobbers. I didn't like most people on the card. The only thing of note was a fight between Justin Gaethje, who is basically a glorified tough man. This guy has like zero technique, but he's tough and strong. So I like him, you know what I mean? And Max Holloway, who's like probably the second best striker in the UFC right now. And in my opinion, one of the best fighters of all time because he fucking is a fighter, right? The match was a completely one-sided affair with Max Holloway systematically beating the shit out of Justin Gaethje, just like I knew he would, because as I said, Justin Gaethje is just a jobber. He has like no boxing skills at all. It's just that the level in the UFC is so low that he can have a great record by just beating other jobbers like Dustin Poirier and things like that, unimpressive things. But Max Holloway is someone that does have good boxing. So I knew he was going to piece him up. It's exactly what he did. Now, despite winning 5 rounds, right? Max Holloway, when there's like 10, 15 seconds left, he points to the center of the octagon and he tells Justin Gaethje, let's fucking go, basically, right? And this starts a situation where both of them are just wailing at each other, right? Now, it was very untechnical wailing. It was, once again, just like the Ilya Topuria fight. It was just button mashing. But that's fine because that was the point. Max Holloway proved that he is the better fighter, right? He proved that he doesn't have to button mash to beat the likes of Justin Gaethje, right? But despite this, right, he showed cojones, motherfuckers. He showed big balls to risk his health, right, and the victory that he was certainly going to get in what certainly was going to be the fight of the night. He risked all this to give the fans a moment and to establish himself as the badass that he is, right? Now, this created a moment, like I just said. And afterwards, the 2 other fights that came after, nobody gave a flying fuck, Nobody cared. The crowd was dead. Like, of course, they would still pop when there's like, like a big move or a knockout or something like that. Of course they would. But largely, people cared about the big moment, right? And at the press conference afterwards, Dana White couldn't stop talking about the moment because fundamentally, even though Dana White will never be Vince McMahon, Dana White gets it. He understands that it's not about the fights, right? Of course, when he comes out there, he's like, that was a great fight. We have the best fights in the world. But he understands that that's not the real draw of the UFC. The real draw of the UFC is no different than the real draw of any sport. The moment, motherfucks. The moments that are made. I'll give you this example. In NFL, there aren't that many teams. There's 32 or 36 teams. I always forget, right? There's a handful of teams, and one of them is going to be champion at the end of the year, right? So you have a 3% chance, basically, to become champion in any given year in the NFL. Now, obviously, that changes based on your skill and other things, right? But the season opener in NFL could theoretically be the Super Bowl as well, right? A throwaway game, like a week 3 game, could end up being the Super Bowl if everything falls into place correctly, right? Yet we care a lot more about the Super Bowl than we do about a random-ass week 3 game, right? Why? Because the Super Bowl is a built-in moment, right? Irrespective of whether the game's going to be good or not, we are crowning a champion here, and this thing now has higher stakes, right? Higher prices, higher viewership, higher stakes, like I just said, because we're crowning a champion, right? Something is happening in this game that hasn't happened the whole year, right? We're crowning the best team of the year. And that gets people watching, right? It's also a cultural phenomenon, but you understand what I'm saying. Champions League soccer, NBA playoffs, all of these things are predicated under the same premise. of you don't want to miss the moment when X person from X team wins X championship, right? That's the idea. Wrestling is uniquely positioned to generate as many of these moments and generate, more importantly, specifically the exact moment they want, right? So there are things that are tried and true. Wrestling takes advantage primarily of two factors. Number one, it's fixed, it's not a real sport. And two, it's live. So you can connect with the people immediately. That's why when you start an episode of Raw and it starts off with Vince McMahon having Stone Cold arrested, right? You're like, fuck Vince McMahon, right? Because you're seeing it happen in front of you, right? It's easy to suspend that disbelief when you see it happening in front of you and you are playing the role of a sports spectator, right? There's a reason why this is set up like this. The idea is you're there to watch a sport, but it's fake. But when you're there, you kind of forget that it's fake, right? That's what suspension of disbelief is. So the idea is, I'm over here watching a man get arrested. So later that night, or maybe next week, but usually later that night when Stone Cold comes back to the arena with like a cop car, having beat up the cops and escaped their custody, and then goes and beats the hell out of Vince McMahon before security gets him out, right? People lose their fucking minds, right? They wouldn't lose their minds if Stone Cold comes back in time and he's like, I made bail. I'd like to wrestle Taka Michinoku tonight. No, nobody would give a shit because wrestling is not about wrestling. They want him to have his moment, right? And despite this, we have a complete dearth of moments in recent years in wrestling, right? When was the last time something happened on Raw or SmackDown that really piqued your interest? Or you're like, fuck, this was amazing. What an amazing Raw this was. It's been years for me, motherfuckers. It's been years for me since we had a legitimate moment, right? And especially, the moment can be even more effective if it's presented as if it were unscripted, right? So there's a big difference, for example, with Sting appearing at Survivor Series randomly and unannounced, or CM Punk appearing at, Survivor Series randomly and so unannounced. There's a difference between that and, Michael Cole telling you, like, oh, in 2 weeks, Goldberg makes a return, right? And you're like, oh, great, why did you ruin that? Why didn't you just, have Michael Cole shut his fucking mouth, and then 2 weeks later, I'm watching, and I lose my mind, and I'm like, oh, shit, it's Goldberg. Now, the answer to that, and this is AEW is especially guilty of this because they announce fucking everything. They're like, next week, it's not a normal episode of AEW Dynamite, it's AEW Dynamite Big Business. Oh, then after that, it's Spring Dance. Then after that, it's, AEW Tax Day, right? Every fucking week, there's a new special event, instead of Dynamite. And that's a horrible idea because you have nothing to look forward to. Imagine instead, right, if something happens and you didn't expect it to happen. Yes, you might lose some viewers that would have tuned in prematurely to watch that, right? Like, for example, if tomorrow I hear news that Goldberg's going to be on Raw, of course, I'm much more likely to watch Raw. That's true, right? So that's why they announced Goldberg, let's say, right? But if I miss out on Goldberg showing up on Raw because they didn't announce it, then the fear of missing out kicks in, and now I am much more likely, motherfucks, to go and watch Raw regularly so that I don't miss the next big moment, which in this case might be a debut, it might be, a random championship change, things like that. We used to have that shit, right? Now, everyone has 1 year title reigns, and this makes Raw feel useless, right? It's like, based on last week's Raw, what would draw me to watch this week's Raw? The answer that I have is absolutely nothing, because the thing that they tried to present as the thing that would attract you next week is, what will Chad Gable and Sami Zayn do next? Problem is, I don't give a flying fuck about those wrestlers because they're jobbers, right? Just because you put them in the main event and give them some time doesn't mean that they became interesting overnight. Now, if I do watch, it'll be because I'm just curious to see for my own masochism, if you will, right? Just my own masochism to see how much longer the people on top, like Cody Rhodes and Seth Rollins and I guess Gunther in a way, are not going to do anything, right? Like, I would take bets. It's like, what do you think the chances are that Cody Rhodes wrestles this, this Monday or this Friday? I would say it's pretty much zero, right? But what are the odds that he's going to come out in a fucking suit, probably beige or brown, and cut a shit promo? I would say the probability is very, very high, right? I don't give a shit about the promo. I just want it to be over so I can get to something interesting. But I am curious to see whether or not he will wrestle or not, right? But that's not gonna last forever. I'm probably not gonna watch SmackDown or Raw, right? So the idea stands, motherfuckers. The idea stands. If everything is presented ahead of time, they're not taking advantage of the ability to, make the promo happen, right? Even something simple would work, right? But nowadays, they're like, oh, Will Ospreay's in AEW. Great, that's interesting for about 20 minutes. Oh, Kazuchika Okada's there. That's interesting for about 20 minutes. Like, I don't give a shit who Okada's going to beat next. Okada's not interesting enough because he doesn't do anything. He just goes and wrestles and wears a suit, right? Like, he doesn't cut promos. He doesn't say anything charming or fun or entertaining, right? So it's like, I don't care if Okada beats Kip Sabian this week or if, Brian Cage beats Chris Sabin this week. I mean, fucking Kip Sabian this week, right? As a matter of fact, I'd prefer for it to be Brian Cage because he at least looks like a monster and has some charm. But I digress. The point I'm trying to make here is that wrestling, AEW and WWE, they're both guilty of this. AEW more, I think, but WWE is also very guilty of this. And again, recency bias. It was WrestleMania, so like the moments are going to happen. Just like AEW had their moments when CM Punk and Daniel Bryan and Adam Cole debuted all in one night, in one segment, really, right? That was pretty cool in the sense that, like, they're like, oh, like, a lot of people didn't expect it. People expected it because people expect everything nowadays. But it wasn't announced, right? So you're like, oh, this is going to be nice. Like, it's going to be nice to see. Some things were announced, like the CM Punk match, because that was a match, right? Like, CM Punk had already returned. But the point stands, right? If wrestling can create these moments and not wait for them to happen, right? Dana White's excitement, I'll close with this. Dana White's excitement at the finish of the Max Holloway Justin Gaethje fight, which ended with a literal last-second knockout on Justin Gaethje, right? His excitement was that this was not scripted, right? This happened through random chance. It wouldn't be as good if they didn't do this. But they did it, right? They understood their role, at least Max Holloway did. Justin Gaethje didn't have a chance because it's like, this is his only chance to, maybe win the fight. So he went there and he took a beating, and I respect him for that. But the truth is, right, Dana White was excited because he knows that he doesn't have the capacity to plan for this, right? They've tried to do this in the past with UFC, plan for things, and a lot of times the plans have gone awry. Like they were going to have Conor McGregor, they were hoping that he would beat Nate Diaz in their first fight, and they had GSP in the audience. And the whole point obviously was going to be like, Conor was going to say, I want GSP eventually, right? And that would have gotten a lot of buzz. But it didn't happen. Nate Diaz whooped that ass. So we didn't get that moment, right? Dana White, like, when that didn't happen, I'm sure he was fucking pissed, right? Because he's like, damn, I planned for a moment, and once again, like, luck wasn't on my side. But this time, luck was on his side, and that's why he was excited. And that's the beauty of it, motherfuckers. In wrestling, there is no need for luck. You can engineer any moment you want, right? And as long as it's well booked, I should say, as long as it's well booked, the moment could live forever. But instead, what do we get instead? Oh, Obafemi debuted in NXT. I couldn't give a shit, right? Oh, Rhea Ripley has to, go away for a few months. Great, that's not a moment. That's lame. So you see what I'm saying? Wrestling needs to go back to booking moments and not booking matches, motherfucks.